Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Well, hello and welcome to a very special MotorWeek podcast, number 45 in our ongoing series. I'm John Davis, of course, and joining me here in Studio C is road test producer and two-wheeling reporter Brian Robinson.
Thanks for having me, John.
You're very welcome, Brian. And Over the Edge writer and producer and host, Steven Chupnick.
Hello.
You thought there was a little pause there. And our staff writer, Shamit Choksi.
Hey, how are you?
Now, that's sort of the introduction there. I sort of went off schedule because Brian Robinson has been, of the three at the table, has been on the show the longest. How long?
About 14 years.
And Steven, you're the newbie.
I'm only about 2 years.
And Shamit? 5?
About 5 years.
Okay. The reason we're doing that is we're going to talk about and celebrate on this podcast the 30th season of MotorWeek, which in television terms is pretty much an unheard of situation.
Right up there with Meet the Press. And
yeah, I think they probably beat us, but it's been a long time. So we're going to not have our normal podcast routine and format. We're going to talk amongst ourselves about things from the past. According to my calculation, we've road tested somewhere around 5,000 cars and trucks over those 30 years. An awful lot of miles under our wheels. We've traveled the globe. Those in this room have probably racked up more frequent flyer miles than they ever dreamed they would. Our viewers tell us that when they watch the series that they're always surprised at some of the places that we go. So let's just start talking. Let's actually stop on that little aspect. What do you think from the folks that you talk with when you go home or out of town? What do you think they watch MotorWeek that surprises them? Has anyone come up to you and say, gosh, I couldn't believe you did that? Brian, go ahead. You start.
What's the question? What are people?
What do you think people are most surprised at on MotorWeek? What have they told you?
Well, if they're anything like me, they're surprised it actually gets out every week. But
it's like a fire drill around here.
Yeah, just everyone assumes that we're just in Ferraris and Corvettes all the time, but there's a lot of minivans and stuff like that too. So it's maybe not quite as exciting as everyone. I usually have to bring them back down to earth a little bit and be like, yeah, this last month I've just been driving minivans and SUVs. So.
What about you, Shamit? Let me turn the question around a little bit. You've been with the show about 5 years. What has surprised you most in that time? And you also obviously have a lot of friends. What are they surprised about?
Well, I mean, when you first start with MotorWeek, in a way, it's a dream job because if you love cars, you're immersed in cars, and then on top of that, you get to go to cool places to drive these amazing cars and not so amazing cars. My friends were enamored by the job. When I first started, I don't talk about it as much anymore because they hate me now. So I don't tell them where I'm going, or because either they just don't want to hear it anymore. But no, they're surprised by we test everything. I mean, this is not just American cars. This is not just consumer market cars. We've driven everything from Maybachs to tiny little electric. I mean, you name it, everything in between. So, I mean, I'm always astounded. Every day is different here, and that's the best part of being here.
Now, Steven, you unlike the rest of us, you meet more people that are not necessarily directly in the auto industry. What do they tell you?
I think, they're just kind of surprised that the show has lasted, and not in a bad way, but that of everything that's gone on. I mean, there's Top Gear that has really taken off, in Britain, internationally, but it's come here. You have the internet, you have everything that's gone, but it's still continued to come on, and not to toot your horn, but everybody asks me all the time. He goes, "How's John? We love John," and
thank you. That's very sweet.
And that is probably the most question I asked is, "It's John Davis, right?" He says, "Oh, I love him," and again, not to.
Is he going to get a raise next week or what?
People ask, "Do you ever meet John?"
Yeah. I usually say no. I've never met him. Yeah, he.
But I guess what I'm curious about is, are people surprised when they meet members of our staff? Are they expecting something different? Like when they meet you, Steven, you're out there doing all your over-the-edge segments, and you do some pretty outrageous stuff.
I think they know the show, and I think what they're surprised about is that we are everyday people. We're not,
Speak for yourself.
Well, we're not championship race drivers.
Exactly. And then I think that's, we really are down-home people, just regular people that get to drive different cars.
Now, everybody always asks me, all right, you've tested all these cars. What are the most memorable? And I must say, we actually did a list of memorable cars because it's very difficult to carve out a few that you really like. But in your tenures here, is there any car that's just impressed you more than others, or even a couple of cars? Brian?
Probably the one that always stands out was the first time I drove a Dodge Viper. I was like, oh my gosh! I mean, that car scared me to death, and I was on a track.
And you don't scare easily.
Yeah,
you're the motorcycle guy.
That car was just insane to me. I'd never driven anything like that. I mean, you drive a 911, and it's perfect. Everything about it is perfect. That car was just constantly out of control. We were fighting it, and that's probably one of the ones that sticks in my mind.
All engine. Yeah. Jimmy?
I'm gonna have to say the R8.
Nice.
Yeah, beautiful car, incredible. It's a super car. It's just I've fallen in love with it.
Yeah, Audi certainly has made a lot of good impressions with that.
And I have one of the coolest. Not only as an auto journalist, it's like what you want is the greatest commute home. And I have a 60-minute back road commute all the way home. So I get the best roads. And, you drive something like an R8 home. You're not only are people craning to look at the car, but you actually get to take tight turns, and it's just fun going home and coming to work every day because of these cars and the roads that I travel.
Steven?
This might surprise a lot of people, but a minivan. We had a long-term caravan, and I've never
check, please.
No, and I think everybody has a stigma on a minivan, and I got in that car. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I actually like
Steven Chupnick just had twins. I just want to qualify.
That's a good point.
And we actually, and funny enough, just bought a Dodge Caravan. So it's
so you are our minivan king on the staff.
Yeah, but of all the cars, I think the first time I was driving a Camaro and I stalled out and I freaked out because it wouldn't start. And eventually I took off, but it was so cool to start the engine and just go. That was just really neat.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get down to just one or two cars over the entire time we've been on the air. I used to own a Corvette, and when GM first resurrected the ZR1 back, I guess, in the early 80s, I had a chance to drive that in Europe, and that was a pretty special event, and that car has always stuck with me. And that kind of gets me to our next little topic. We do travel a heck of a lot. And I tell people, look, we go a lot of places. We see a lot of airports and a lot of hotel rooms. Because generally when you're in the car, you're trying to go somewhere pretty rapidly. You're on a schedule. You've got a car manufacturer rep sitting next to you, so you're talking the whole time.
Right.
We've seen the world, but we haven't seen the world. But having said that, all of you have traveled a lot. Brian Robinson probably the most. Any place that you've been that really knocked you out?
There's a few. One that sticks out. I'm a road trip guy. I love to drive anywhere for long periods of time. And when the new Mini first came out, we did a rally with old Minis and drove from the southern tip of Ireland to the northern tip. Took a couple of days all through back roads. Really beautiful. That was amazing. Another one was actually, I was still interning here. I hadn't officially started working here. Took a Jeep on the Rubicon Trail for a couple of days. That was awesome. I've always been into outdoor stuff and camping, and I was like, this is incredible. I've got to do whatever I can to get a job here. and then
you found out about everything else you had to do.
Then one other one, I went to Ferrari's headquarters in their test track in Maranello, and that whole experience, I was there to test the 575M Maranello, and we got to tour the factory and the foundry and all that. And the night before, the Ferrari guy, we're having dinner. He's like, "Well, I have some bad news. We're supposed to test on the track tomorrow, but the F1 team is going to be there doing some last-minute testing, so we have to share the track with them." So that was, here we are out there driving, Ferrari 575Ms, which, it's not exactly a slouch of a performance car, but then there's these F1 cars out there, and those things are phenomenal. And we're standing right on the track, and places where we're hard on the brakes in the 575, they're still on the gas and accelerating and upshifting, and just to see those cars and then watch them do a couple laps and then us go out and do a couple laps, it was a cool experience.
Shamid, how about you?
All right, so you guys, I've mentioned this to you guys before, but I've never. I'll let our listeners in on this. So I was 8 years old when I took a field trip from elementary school.
This is when we all feel older. I should say I do. Go ahead.
8 years old. Took a field trip to the MotorWeek studios and met John Davis for the first time at that time. And I decided pretty much at that point that I have to come work for this guy at some point in my life, which I got to do. Have taken some really cool trips, some really cool cars. I think the one that takes the cake is the SLR McLaren Roadster on the Autobahn. There's nothing close to that's probably as close to riding on the back of a missile that I'll ever come. It was an amazing experience. And aside from that, there have been a ton of other. I mean, you said Mini. I had a great drive with a Mini Clubman in Mallorca, Spain, just along the coastal. I mean, beautiful. It's amazing what we get to do here, and we try not to take it for granted. And, I mean, in the end,
we don't tell our spouses everything we're doing.
No, we don't.
Not at all.
Steven, go ahead.
I think two really stand out is recently I was able to go to Japan to drive an electric taxi from a company was making switchable batteries in cars, and they invited me out there. And just to be out there and experience not only Japan, but in an electric car that people have never seen really over there before, and to get looks like that, to drive on the other side of the road, that was just a weird incident. And then I was in Montreal and Quebec City on a snowmobile, and that was in the backwoods of Quebec. And you just don't see white and trees at all like that. It was -6. And, I mean, my sweat was freezing in my helmet. And it was just, you look at yourself and you're like, this is just cool.
I will say that my most interesting trip has to be Iceland. We went there with Land Rover, and the concept was they were going to take us to where Journey to the Center of the Earth was inspired. And it was quite a trip. It was with Bill Baker, who was just starting to leave. He was leaving his post as head of Land Rover or PR, and it was an incredible trip that I think everybody that went will never forget. So we've all had a chance to go some pretty amazing places.
Yeah, I didn't even mention Detroit.
Gee, you didn't mention Detroit?
Yeah, really. I forgot about that one.
The way that the automotive industry has evolved over the last 30 years is pretty staggering. Compared to when you first joined the program or even first got interested in automobiles, what do you think is the biggest change?
I would say the biggest change is the fact that there hasn't been much change. I mean, cars have gotten bigger and heavier, but our fuel mileage hasn't gotten that much bigger. We're still, we've been hearing about fuel cells and electric cars for years, and just finally getting to the point where we're driving some realistic electric cars. To me, I just think maybe the pace of development hasn't been
on the powertrain.
Yeah, certainly safety, huge strides in safety and convenience and luxury features, but we're still pretty much burning gas. And
that's a comforting thought, really, because I remember back in 1980, Discover magazine doing a piece on what travel would be like in 2010, where we are now, and they're talking about floating cars and the Jetsons,
hovercraft,
and we're not there. We're on wheels, and it's kind of cool. But you're right, safety has gone up tremendously, and those are the things that are more important than floating 3 feet above the ground.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, we're in 2010, and not to bring a movie into it, but Back to the Future went to 2010, and there were, floating skateboards, floating cars, flying cars. And we're not even remotely close to that.
No,
but I think electric cars, I don't think anyone would have actually thought that, 20, 30 years ago, that we'd actually be driving electric cars, that there would always be gas.
Yeah, unsatiable supplies. I agree really with everything that everyone at the table has said. I think the thing that staggers me the most, and Pat Goss and I talk about this a lot, is the complexity. When this show started, you could still open the hood, and basically it wasn't too cluttered under there, and there were a few wires, and away you went. And now they're so complex that they're putting shrouds over them because they can't make them really look pretty anymore. So you got these big plastic shields that I just think are ridiculous. So the complexity of the cars, but on the other hand, they're much better. I mean, they're safer. They do get better fuel economy. They're much more luxurious, all of the above. I'm a little concerned about where we're headed with all of this, with more stuff on the inside of the cars to distract you from driving. And when I read about, more efforts to make cars drive themselves, that kind of puts a knife right into the heart of enthusiasts. But cars are better today. People say, why aren't they built like they were used to? Well, they were death traps. Yeah. Having said that, and going back to your movie reference, Steven and the rest of you, when MotorWeek, the movie, and this is our lightning round, so we only have 2 minutes to chew on this. When MotorWeek, the movie, is produced, who wrote this question? Michelle? When MotorWeek, the movie, is produced and comes to a theater near you, who is going to be cast as you, and what car will your character be driving?
That's pretty easy.
All right. Well, all right. You say that's pretty easy? I'll start with you then, Shamit.
I think it would have to be Eric Estrada in a '79 Corolla.
Oh my
that would
goodness.
be me.
Eric Estrada's good. I was thinking John Stamos for you too.
I take that as a compliment. Thank you. At least I have his hair. Maybe not as good look.
All right, Steven, you're the movie guy.
I want Leonardo DiCaprio playing me. You got to. I mean,
shoot for the stars.
The guy, you have to. I've been compared to Adam Sandler and Paul Rudd. And,
I see Sandler.
I get all these.
That egghead.
I do. There's a few other people who I've been compared to who aren't that good looking, and I kind of want someone who's actually good looking to play me. And like we talked about before, I've got twins. You drive a minivan. That's, Leo can do a minivan.
Brian Robinson.
Well, to get to the enormous depth of my personality that you all know so well, it would take quite an actor to pull it off. So I think of three guys that could pull it off, and that's Steve Buscemi, Gilbert Gottfried, or Bobcat Goldthwait.
What would you be driving?
He would be driving something old that constantly breaks down and has full of flaws, but he constantly tells people that's character, not flaws.
Oh, well, then you're right up my alley because I picked Danny DeVito in a Yugo.
Nice. Nice. I love it.
We haven't heard the bell yet, but ring the bell, Michelle.
Danny DeVito, really? No.
Well, he's my idol.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our MotorWeek mailbag. Let's get as far away from that question as possible. But this question comes from Chris right here in our home state of Maryland. It says, seems most manufacturers create a space for the rear license plate to reside, but not one for the front. They usually have to pin it on the bumper with some kind of hang-on. Why is that?
Interesting question.
That's a very good question, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I think the simple answer is that the states, an awful lot of states, and I don't know the number, do not require a front license
like a half
plate.
A dozen or so, maybe, that have front plates.
Yeah, it's not the majority that require front plates, and so the car maker stylists don't want to mess up the front end with a license plate hanger if they don't have to. Right. I think that's probably the biggest answer. Also, it gives the dealers a chance to charge you another $30 or $40 for that license plate hanger on the front.
Wow.
So there's a little profit motive there. But I think primarily it's because the stylists just want to keep the front ends as clean as possible. And after all, the front end is the face on a car. And if you don't have to wear something on your face, you probably won't, unless it's your choosing.
I don't even think it's just the people who are designing the car. I think it's the people who are buying the car. People, they don't want, no one wants this little ugly thing in the front of your car. You want...
Or a little indentation.
Or an indentation, right. You want a clean front.
Yeah. Well, I hope that, Chris, that answers your question, because obviously in Maryland we do have to have front license plates, and we do have to have the little hanger-ons and all the extras that go with that. Before we close our MotorWeek podcast that we've talked about, our 30th anniversary, I want to go around the table one more time. Anything else about your time with MotorWeek that you want to tell anybody that just sticks in your mind?
I was amazed just thinking about it that I've been here almost half of the show's run, which kind of blows my mind. Just from hearing all the stories from when from before I started working here, it seemed like a much cooler place and a lot more cool and exciting things.
It really is.
So it seems like it's been around for 100 years, and I've just gotten this small, boring chunk of it. But I was kind of amazed by that.
How about you, Shamit? Years.
It's kind of a legendary place. It's been around for a long time. I mean, if you stand in the offices and look around, I mean, there's posters and people that have been around for decades.
All over the place.
So and I'm still I'm still pretty green and new on the block. So I go to guys like Robinson and you, John. I'm always asking about the old days, and I like to hear about that stuff. So
by cracky.
So it's fun. It's a really just a cool place.
Steven, I should say, Steven was not automotive oriented when we hired him. Your job before had been in Hollywood.
Yes.
And so really cars were not in your mainstream.
No, and I think that's exactly what surprised me, is that how much I have learned about cars in the auto industry over the past 2 years.
And what do you think about it?
I mean, it's just like movies. There's a bunch of junk, and then there's some really, really good stuff. And I'd say the majority is really, really good stuff. And not to give a plug to the Facebook and Twitter sites out there, but I talk to a lot of fans on our Facebook and Twitter site, and it's really neat to hear and see what people say about the show from an outside point of view, that they really enjoy it.
And that's really what this show has been about for 30 years, putting the cars first for the consuming public. We've always said from the beginning that the cars were the stars, and we've stayed true to that philosophy, and we hope that we'll keep doing that in the future. Thank you very much for letting us all reminisce a little bit. That was fun, because we really basically just talked off the top of our heads. And thanks for joining us for this special edition of our MotorWeek podcast. I want to give special thanks, as always, to our audio engineer who makes us come through loud and clear, Jim Bigwood, our podcast creator, Bob Mixter, and as always, our very able producer, Michelle Parker, the lady with the bell. There she is. And Michelle, we're overdue to have you sitting up here on the panel, so maybe that's for next time. For all of us at MotorWeek, thanks very much for letting us celebrate. I'm John Davis, and be sure to catch MotorWeek on your local public television station, and also now on HD Theater. Till next time, keep on driving and keep the sunny side up.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series, each week on your local PBS station.